record, be talking to some of our most experienced judges. Lisa Schmidt, who, they're going to tell you about themselves. And of course, Janet Foy. And we're hoping that Cesar Torrente is going to be on, but we haven't found him just yet. But let me start. So we're sort of working up. Lisa, perhaps you could tell us briefly the road that you took to becoming a judge and what judging you do.
Well, I started out as an amateur writer, and then I reinvented myself and became a professional. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm going to take the L program. Do you want to join?" And I went, "No, I don't know." And she convinced me, and we went through the program together. And then we decided, well, should we do the small R? Let's try it. And then it just became a friendly competition on who was going to go through the ranks first. So now I am an S judge. I've had my license about 7 years now as an S judge. I'm lucky enough to be on the L faculty too with Janet, which is just a fabulous dream I've had of helping upcoming judges, future judges, to learn what we do and pursue maybe their dream of becoming a judge. And it's a long, arduous process, but there's so many pluses about it too. There's
Lisa, can you just sort of in line, first you did the learner judges program, right? And then I'm guessing you you passed that with distinction, which made it possible for you to become to what was next? To become a small R.
Well, after it was actually quite fast after the L program. I passed with distinction, and then I applied for a small R, and I was notified that I was within a program within a year, and that is absolutely doable. These days, it takes a little while to get a small R program, but it's.
So what's the program? What do you have to do?
You have to get a certain number of scores. I can go through the details if you
don't need the details, just
but you do have to get into the small R program after you've passed the L with distinction. You have to get a certain number of scores at a certain level, and you have to have been an L graduate with distinction within 5 years to apply. And then once you apply and you're approved, then you are told that there's a program somewhere around the country. It could be East Coast, West Coast, Florida, Midwest, and the candidates travel all over the country for a training program. And
what do you do in the training program?
There is an instructor judge, always an S or an FEI judge, who reviews pretty much the L program, but a bit more in detail, biomechanics, judging the movements, judging the collectives, as well as rules, which is very important. And then you are you're at a show and you do different judging for the small R from training level to second level. Most often, depending on the schedule, it's the highest level or the highest test of that level. And the head judge or the instructor of the program will judge, and then the candidates will also judge with scribes, and then their placings and scores are compared to the instructor judge. And we all talk as a group, and it's a great learning opportunity from not only the instructor, but also from the colleagues that you are involved with. And you become lifelong friends often in a lot of these judging groups.
So how do you pass the test? I mean, you have a test, I'm guessing?
Yes, there's after a certain amount of apprentice judging, and what happens now is there's this wonderful group apprentice judging where the candidates can get together and hire a judge at a show. So that judge is focused completely on them. It used to be that you would apprentice with the judge who was at sea, but now with the group apprenticing, the candidates get the entire focus of that particular judge instructor, and it's such a great learning process. So they have to do a certain amount of apprenticing, and then there is a final exam, which is a written exam, and the practical judging exam. And there's usually two instructors for that, or examiners, and then they go through all of the materials, and it goes to the license officials committee, and a blessing is given, or sometimes not, but most of the time. And then you get a notice that you've passed your small R, and you have to have your small R at least 2 years before you can apply for your large R.
And you have to have judged a certain amount in
A
those
certain amount of
years?
shows and a certain amount of rides. And also there's another riding qualification for the large R. And there's also a riding qualification for an S, as well as judging a certain number of classes and a certain number of shows.
So Janet, could you lead us on from that into the international judging?
So after you've spent about 10 years doing that,
Or more.
then after about 3 years of being a senior judge, you can apply to be an FEI judge. We were just changed from stars to levels. So level 4 is now like the 5 stars. So you'll start to see everybody listed as levels, so that all the FEI officials are on the same, whether you're eventing or jumping. We were the only stars, the dressage, but we thought we were special, but we've lost our stars. So we're sad. So you have to go to Europe, and you have to do another exam. And then after a couple of years of becoming what they would call a candidate judge or a level 2 judge, then you also take another exam, and that's how you're promoted through there. The 5 star, which used to be called O, or Olympic judge, because only that level can judge world championships, Olympics, large championships. That really is not an application process. It comes from an invitation where they look around and they say, this country's very strong and they need another judge at that level, or this country's never had anybody on the Olympic team, so we don't really need anybody there. This person's done a lot of judging in Europe. They make you sort of prove yourself. They'll put you on the Pan Am Games. My sort of final exam was the first under 25 championships in Europe, which was fairly stressful. And Irina Maknami, the Russian, was also there. So we judged that competition, and we didn't make any huge mistakes, so we were promoted. So it depends on how quickly you go through the ranks. We obviously have quite a few 4 stars that have never made 5 star judges. Lilo, unfortunately, I think for the whole sport in general, was promoted very late and did not really have many years. She was able to do an Olympics and a couple of World Cups and a World Championship, but I think she would have had a lot more to give had they done that earlier. So that's a shame. Now there's no more age limit.
Explain, Janet, explain the age limit.
Well, there used to be an age limit where at age 70, you were out unless you were a 5 star. Then you got to be 72 and then you were out. Well, we all know nowadays that age is sort of relevant, and we have a lot of very, very experienced people. I do really understand the idea. I don't want to be a 5 star for life, because we need to have opportunity for the new up and coming judges to judge. Nobody needs to judge for Olympic Games. That's silly. But we lost a lot of valuable people. Canada ended up with nobody, really. They have Lee, which just married Sarah, which is a huge conflict for him. So really, Canada doesn't really have anybody. Now, Cara Witham, through this new system, has come back, retested. You can't come back at the level you were. You have to come back one level below that. So she is now a 4 star.
So I don't even know, is there a limit? How does somebody get asked not to judge anymore? Is that such a thing? They just
Well,
fade away.
no, I think, at some point, Gary Rockwell just made this decision, and I think it's a very good decision. I don't think anybody really realizes when we go to the Olympics or when we go to a Europe to judge or we do a Pan Am Games, that it is not the same system we have in the US. We do not get paid, nothing. They complain about the airfare. The Tokyo Olympic Games gave me $700 for my airfare. And of course, flying 17 hours was a business class airfare. It was $4,000. So I used my miles. But basically, after all of this wonderful, and it is wonderful, it's a wonderful experience. I have to say, in Europe, they usually have 2 panels of 5 judges. So you usually judge half a day. And then the rest of the day you spend sightseeing or touring, and you stay in fabulous hotels, no Motel 6, eat at fabulous restaurants. So there are definitely benefits to being an FEI judge, but it's not getting paid. You end up actually losing money. So at some point, those of us that it is our job, I don't have another job. A lot of Europeans, like Hans Christian's a veterinarian. There's a lot of people that have real jobs and they don't do horses. So for them, it's a different situation. But, Gary said, I've done Olympic Games, I've done World Championships. And for me, right now, I want to train, I want to teach. That's where my passion is. And so I'm just going to retire. And I totally understand that, because he lost, I don't even know how much money he lost in this judging thing, doing all the European stuff. So it's a different system.
Are there riding requirements for the R level of judges?
The
Large R,
FEI level?
large R, I don't mean large R.
Yes.
There is for the large R's, you
Yeah,
mentioned that.
small
but what about
R,
for
small
F?
R, you have to judge, you have to have ridden through 4th level with, I think it's 63%. And then Prix St. George, and then you have to have Grand Prix scores to be a senior judge.
Okay. And what about for the FEI? Are there any riding requirements?
You have to be a senior judge from your country. So everyone from the US has ridden Grand Prix.
But that's not necessarily the case in Europe?
Not always the case in Europe, no.
Okay. Going back sort of to the lower levels, in the let's say training through 2nd level, Lisa, let me start with you again. What do you think of what is missed most in the schooling of the horses that you see in the test? What comes out in the test that you think all of these people that are riding at home need to pay a little extra attention to?
I would say accuracy, especially if riders have aspirations to going to a championship where there's more than one judge. There's not a whole lot you can hide, especially with 20-meter circles at B or E. Corners are very important at 1st level and 2nd level. Transitions after lengthenings and mediums are very important. So I find when I judge, those are really the 2 areas that I find lacking: the transitions and the accuracy of the movements.
Janet, do you have anything to add, thinking more about the higher levels?
I think accuracy, I call it people losing stupid points. Because you spend all this money to go to the show, and when you can't ride an accurate 20-meter circle, or on your Tempe changes, you can't stay on the diagonal line and you end up at R. My scribes get tired of drifting left, drifting right. It's really a way to lose silly points. If you can ride an accurate test, if you can know where your horse should go and can steer it there, the horse would truly be more on the aids, in my opinion.
Right.
And the horse will be in better balance. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
as well
So
as
the
easy.
accuracy is a problem all the way through the levels.
Mhm. And that's, as the teacher here, that's what you've got to be doing at home. You can't just turn it on in the show ring, which I think it's got to be
Yes,
every
for
day,
sure.
every ride, every day,
Yeah.
right? Going back to Lisa, what are a couple of movements that you think are most often misunderstood or ridden that people may not quite understand what you're looking for? Are there, I mean, you've mentioned transitions, for example, in your lengthenings.
I think it's not just movements. I think that many riders don't realize that there's more to a movement, for instance, in the entry halt. Most riders, and including some of my students, go, oh, I come in, I halt, and then I go turn left. Well, it's not just the halt, it's your trot or canter coming in, it's your halt, and then the transition in and out, and the quality of the trot afterwards before the turn. And I don't think many riders bother to look at the whole box of what the whole movement is and where it really starts and ends. And at many levels, it says circle, and then you go through the corners and the short sides, and then a movement starts. Well, the judge is still judging the quality and how the corners are used after that particular movement. So I don't really think that riders pay a lot of attention to that.
Mhm.
And there's
Could
no
you,
reason why a halt can't be a 10, particularly at the lower levels, as you know, Lendon.
what do you look for in a leg yield, in a correct leg yield, Lisa?
Well, if I'm sitting from the front, I look for balance, that I look for the accuracy. If it says from one letter to one letter, it should be absolutely accurate. I look for the quality of the gait. I look for the rhythm, which is basics and pyramid of training. I look for the contact. All these things are I'm calculating in my mind as I see the movement. Some people go, oh, do you look at the crossing? Well, to me, while the crossing might be a criteria, I'm looking at so much else before that because of the basics. I hope that's helpful for the person that asked the question.
And what about the position of the horse, straightness, bend?
Well, we want to see the body in line with the side that they're leg yielding from, and a flexion of the pole away. We don't want to see inside rein and cranking the neck, because biomechanically that makes the horse fall on the other shoulder, and they're out of balance, and they might lose rhythm.
Exactly. Janet, thinking of the higher levels, what movements do you think might be misunderstood, or just the riders aren't really figuring out how to ride them correctly?
Well, it seems to be a trend in the US that bend is going out of style in half pass. The riders forget that the shoulders and the neck, their body as well as the horses, need to be pointed to the letter they're going in, and they end up letting the shoulders come straight ahead with a little bit of bend in the neck. The other thing that happens a lot in pre-St. George, I-1, a little bit fourth level as well, is the riders are going too much sideways in all the half passes. They think if they end up 12 meters before the letter that we're going to love that and say, oh, yay, that's great. Wow, that horse can really go sideways. We're taking 0.5 off. We want to see the horse go to the letter it says in the test. There's a reason for that, because there's a progression through the test that eventually those angles get more oblique, but also the horse should be stronger and also more supple. So going more sideways is not helpful. So the other thing that does not happen, horses are not straightened in the corner after shoulder in. Horses need to be straight before a turn. If you're in shoulder in and you're doing a circle, fine, you don't straighten. But when you come to the end of center line, or you come to the end of the arena and you have a corner, you have to go back to shoulder 4.
Back to the accuracy, someone has asked the question, what what part of the horse or rider should be at the letter for it to be accurate? And how
I
about
would
with the
say
flying
shoulder,
change?
yeah, between the front of the shoulder and the back of the rider's leg, somewhere, somewhere along there. If we're talking about like an extended canter on the diagonal, that's a little bit different because we want to see the flying change still on the diagonal marker. So the flying change would be the very first stride that hits the track, and the horse is still on the diagonal line. So that's a little bit different situation.
And the flying change, the same thing. You ideally,
Yes.
though, it's at that point, but doesn't
Yes.
it? It also matters just a little where the stride hits.
It does. And I mean, we're not there with a microscope, but
Right.
when you do the flying change and then you have 3 full strides of canter before the letter, that's
Yeah.
too soon. Yeah.
Okay. Lisa's mentioned, sort of talked about this, but let me ask you, Janet, how do you decide? Let's say you're doing a shoulder in left from B to F. B to F, yes. What goes through your mind when you're coming up with your score? What's your brain process? Lisa
We
sort
have
of
a
covered
little
it.
bit of a sort of a formula that we use.
Mhm.
And I think it's a little bit, my husband loves to leave money around the house. There's quarters, there's dimes, there's pennies. Occasionally I get lucky and there's a 50-cent piece. So dressage judging is a little bit like that, where you gather up all that money and then you have to decide this is worth more, this is worth less. Throw it in that machine at the bank and it comes up with a score or an amount. And then we not only have to think about that, we also have to think about a comment. And the comment should relate to the most basic problem that we see. Where was the first place I deducted points? So I look at the quality first. I look at the quality of the trot, the quality of the canter, quality of the walk. And then I think about the basics, the training scale. And obviously, if we're judging training level, it doesn't go all the way up to the top. So we go check, 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 check. So if it's an 8 moving horse and the basics are good, I'm in an 8, maybe a 9. Then I go to the essence or the most important thing of the movement, which we were talking about, leg yielding, which is the crossing. And the horse is doing this beautiful crossing. Okay, I'm staying at my 8 or 9. And then the last thing I finally look at is the accuracy, or which we call the modifiers. So if this 8 or 9 is going too much sideways or doesn't get there, I'm going to take off, depending if it's a coefficient, a 0.5 if it's a double coefficient, because that ends up as 1 point. So you have this little add minus as you go along. And so in that case, my comment would be accurate, inaccurate. If they lose rhythm, if they have their mouth open, if their pole is flexed the wrong direction, if they're not parallel, then those are the places we stop, make our comment. We don't then really need to talk about accuracy if there's a problem with the basics.
I think the comment I used to hear so very, very much, and you mentioned it, I just want to make a point of it. I'm riding a quarter horse Arab standard bred cross that's a paint, and the judge hates paints, and because I can't get a really good score. No matter how perfect my test is, I can't get that 75 that fancy warm blood is getting, that shakes its head every now and then. Can you explain why my paint quarter horse Frisian
Yes,
Appaloosa cross?
we would call it an Amish warm blood, because that's the perfect example. So if you have let's call it a 6 moving horse. So it's a satisfactory moving horse. You're 6, 6, 5 with the gaits. Now your training has to be better. Your accuracy has to be better. We can add up to 2 points on top the gait score. So if you have a 6 trot, you could be getting all 8s if you rode an accurate test. Now, certainly there are certain things that horse probably cannot accomplish just because of the breeding, perhaps the conformation, extended trot, passage. I mean, you never know where the horse is going to end up. But as a general rule, there are certain movements. That type of horse is usually pretty much should stay at second level or below. But with good training, they easily should be at 70%.
So Lisa, let me go back to you. We've had someone that's asked a question that's kind of on this subject. Does a pony have any disadvantages in dressage?
I think we have to look at it the same as all the rest of the horses. We have to look at the quality. There are some very fancy German riding ponies out there that have 8, 9 gaits. And then there's some little quarter horse ponies that might be 6 gaits also. But if the training is on the right track, there, as Janet said, there's no reason why the scores can't be higher based on the training and based on the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, Lendon, though, that we have to be reasonable as far as what some of those more average horses can do at the upper levels. And I am very distressed often because a horse that was just a fabulous horse, second level and below, is being tortured into third or fourth level with a double bridle because the rider wants their bronze medal. And the horse, they just can't do it. They are not athletic enough. I just watched the Russian figure skater land 3 quads. Okay, she's amazing. I could train for the next 200 years and I could never land 1. So I have to be reasonable about my standard of athleticism and not try to compare myself to that athlete. So, you know, at the end of the day, I hope people consider their horses' welfare and are their horses really able and happy to accomplish the level they're trying to do. And sometimes it's kinder for the horse to sell it to someone who will enjoy it at training first and second level, and the horse will have a happy life, than to try to put it in a double bridle and create a lot of problems.
Exactly. Lisa, could you just describe, this has been a question that's been added in, what you look for in a good rein back?
Well, it's not just the rein back that we're judging. We are judging the halt. Well, the rein back is the essence of the movement, but we are judging the transition into the halt. We're judging the halt. We're judging the rein back, and we're also judging the transition out. So a rider could have a fabulous rein back where we're thinking, well, that was very obedient. It was diagonal back. He was clearly accepting the contact. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the horse leaps into the transition out of the rein back for whatever reason. And then we'd have to come down on the score. But we do want to see all of those pieces put together, with the essence being the rein back itself. And then we would come down for the transition out. Depending on if it was a major disobedience, we'd come down 1, 2. If it's just a little bracing, it could be a half a point. There's all these different things that can happen during the course of a rein back or many different movements.
Janet, you wanted to describe the actual rein back steps?
The rein back has to be diagonal pairs. If your halt is not square, it's difficult to get the first step diagonal. That's why the halt being square is important. The horse should also stay and carry the contact. We see a lot of rein backs where as soon as the horse starts backing, in a way, the rein back becomes backwards instead of staying forward in front of the leg to the contact. So straightness, diagonal pairs. The counting for me, if it's willing, is, this all of course changes at Grand Prix. There we take no prisoners. They're supposed to know what they're doing. But as Lisa said, the willingness is very, very important. But the diagonal pairs is very important. That's the rhythm. And rhythm, as we know, is the first thing on the training scale. So
Lisa, may a rider approach you at the show about a test?
They can if they have permission from the TD, that's the technical delegate. And the technical delegate will approach us and say that there is a competitor who'd like to speak with us about a test or a certain movement. And then with the TD present, we can speak to the competitor.
Sorry. Okay, one of the often a subject that often comes up for discussion. How do your scores reflect the issue of behind the vertical, especially with a horse that is hugely expressive and elastic? I'll put that to both of you. Who wants to start?
Oh, I will. I think we have to be a little bit like Catholics when it comes to judging. We have to decide, is that a little sin, a bigger sin, go to purgatory, or are they going straight to hell? So if we think about why the horse comes behind the vertical, occasionally we'll see more in the younger horse training, first level, second level, a really young, super powerful horse, and he loses his balance for a moment, finds it in the rider's hands, gets behind the vertical for a moment, and then regains a balance and it goes well. So that's a problem that may be a 0.5 deduction, and it will stay in that one box and won't be carried down to the submission or the rider score. If we have a horse that, let's talk about the horse that the rider puts the double bridle on, doesn't have a good seat and is constantly balancing on the reins, and that's why the horse is behind the vertical. For me, I like to make my point with the collectives and put the lowest score where I think the biggest problem is. So in that case, I would make the rider score lower than the horse's submission score, because it's really a rider-induced problem. So we have to decide, is the neck short because of tension? Spanish horses, Iberian horses, you will never ever have a horse with the pole the highest point and have it in front of the vertical, because it would be off the bit. And if you look at some stallions, Donner Hall, the old videos of Donner Hall with Karen Rabine, if the judges had insisted back then that the pole was the highest point, the horse never would have been on the bit. So it's one of those things you have to look at, and you have to decide, is it a pervasive problem? Was it a momentary problem? Is it a basic problem that the contact is bad and restricted throughout the whole test? Then you keep getting more and more strict with your scores.
Lisa, do you have anything to add? Sorry.
Well, I'm with Janet on analyzing whether or not it's pervasive, but also we can see a horse who's not only behind the vertical, but they're behind the leg and they're dropping the contact, which is even worse than just dropping behind the vertical. A horse can be behind the vertical because they're heavy. They can drop the contact, and we can come down on a score if it's even more pervasive, given that they're behind the leg and behind the vertical.
Okay. I'm just going to be going through some of the questions, so things will be kind of in interesting orders. Janet, when judging internationally, do you leave weeks beforehand, or do you leave around a few days before you need to judge?
Well, usually there's a jog the day before. So and that's usually in the afternoon. I like to be there a day early just to rest and sort of get over the jet lag. So if the jog's on Wednesday, I try to plan on arriving Tuesday. Oftentimes, and it has happened, there's been a flight cancellation or a problem and I don't arrive until the morning of the jog. Oftentimes I don't have a suitcase, so I always take one carry-on and pack at least 1-2 days worth of judging clothes. And then coming home, that's a little bit easier because the flights always leave in the morning. So we have the finish of the show on Sunday, and I come home Monday morning, and I'm home Monday late afternoon, evening.
Okay, Lisa, what are your most valued qualities in a scribe? Very important person, right?
Oh, well, one that has had some dressage experience, because I have had at times scribes who have had no dressage experience. They might be hunter riders who've been pulled in from the barn the show is at and have to teach them about dressage, which is not impossible, but some knowledge about dressage that they, to me, very important that what happens in the box stays in the box. As far as scores and comments that a judge might give on the test, they can't go to, they shouldn't go to their friends and say, oh, did you know that that judge gave that horse a 4 and said disobedient when I thought it was terrific? So being discreet is a very important quality in a scribe. Knowing some scribe shorthand, and also these days, if you're on the Black
Typing.
Horse or the horse show office program, they have to be a very good typist. What else, Janet? What do you?
No, I think I have to tell everybody because it was unbelievable. My scribe in Tokyo, which was the most important show I've ever judged in my whole life, could type with 2 fingers. And I had to make sure that I got the score first so that the score was always correct. And she could type maybe 2 words. So I was not able to give a lot of comments, which I was very upset with because I like to try. I put comments in my 7s. I try to do a lot of comments, and I don't go on and on with 25 sentences, but it was very stressful for me to have a scribe that did the 2 fingers. So, you know, we learn to deal with a lot of different things. We have sometimes scribes that we have to tell them to please be quiet. I had a German, in Germany, you get their German S judges. So I had one at Aachen and I'm at C, and I would say blah, 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 8. And he would go, yeah. And then I would say blah, 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 6. And he'd go, oh. And I had to tell him to stop it. You know, every time he agreed with me, I got the yeah. And then when he didn't, I got the heavy sigh and heavy breathing. So it would be fun to have a book on scribes, because I don't think anybody has any idea what it's like to spend 8 hours with someone you just met. So, like speed dating.
I have a story that this didn't happen to me, but it did happen to a colleague where she said to a scribe that the flying change was not clean, and the scribe wrote dirty. So you do have to have a scribe that has a little knowledge and knows and doesn't do too much shorthand.
And from our point of view, if they're not typing and they're writing, that they're somewhat legible.
Yes, that's very important. I do think some of our judges, when I'm doing judge training, and I think Lisa will find this as well, the younger judges feel like they need to put everything they see down in one box. And then the scribes just give up and they put what they think is important. And unfortunately, sometimes the most important thing is lost. So we try to train our judges to limit it to 2 or 3 good comments and not just go on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Starting with Lisa, is there a difference in your judging at a schooling show and at a rated show?
No, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I don't think it's fair for someone at a schooling show to be judged on a different level than at a licensed show, because it gives someone, perhaps either with a higher score, a false sense of where the training is going, or with a lower score, it may not want them to come back into the ring again. So no, absolutely not. It's the same methodology and the same level through each different show.
And
Yeah,
at some
we hope
schooling,
that that
oh, sorry, Janet, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say that I hope that that happens. The other thing that I want to bring this up because Gary and I are chairs of the Judges Committee, and we're working very hard to make judging as consistent as we can throughout the country, because we find it heartbreaking for the competitors and the owners and the sponsors of these horses and riders to have qualified for either a regional championship or young horse or festival or young riders or juniors through judges that have been cherry picked by the show management because they're known to be high scores. And what happens is these people come into these big competitions very high on the ranking list, but they're not reality scores because they've not really gone out to a CDI. So they get to regionals or they get to the festival. And then we evil, naughty, horrible FEI judges. And this is, I think, where FEI judges get a bad reputation because we actually score higher than the S judges when it's good. So we use the scale better. But often those people that are ranked first or second end up last. And then it's devastating for them because they have hopes and they've spent all this money. So we're really, this standard is so important that you can't try to be popular and, oh, I'm going to give high scores because it makes everybody feel good. And then I'm going to get a lot of shows and then I can make a living and, you know, pay for my horse or whatever. I really feel you should give an honest score and positive comments. And as long as the rider is getting helpful comments, nothing derogatory, nothing nasty, but helpful comments, it will help them with their journey. And I really do riders really, I'd love to see some people type in, do they really pick those judges to go to because they want the high scores or do they want a reality?
Mhm. Oftentimes at schooling shows, the judge will speak to a rider after the test if there's some time. What about, do you ever speak to the rider after a test in a rated show?
No, it's not legal.
Okay.
You're not
Thank you.
supposed to.
Yeah.
I do want to, can I
yeah.
address this one question about the front leg and the hind leg?
Oh, I haven't gotten to that yet.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Well,
What's the
okay, because
question?
what about the diagonal pairs lining up? If the front and the hind leg, it just went, there it is, the front and the hind leg line up but look flashy, but backs are hollow. How is this rewarded? It seems to be a trend, but could be wrong. So if we look back 30, 40 years of the confirmation of the warm bloods and the horses that were being ridden in the Olympics, the hind legs were longer than the front legs. Fact of life. So that diagonal cannon bone came from that era where that was what you were supposed to look for, was that in the trot and the extensions, we wanted to see those legs diagonal. If you look at the modern horses with the huge front legs and how much bigger, I mean, they're almost freaks of nature, some of them. And you look at how they use their shoulder just by nature out in the field. If you tried to match the hind cannon bone to the front cannon bone, that hind leg would be hitting the belly. It would look totally crazy. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some bad riding in the world. And yes, some of those horses are disconnected and some of them are flinging their front legs and not really coming through the back. But I would say a little bit, if that's all you look at, and you're just looking at that diagonal cannon bone, then you need to change how you look at a horse. You need to look at the whole horse. You need to look at how the muscles are moving. Is where the front leg points, is that hind leg pushing the horse to that spot? And the really top horses in the world, they're extravagant movers, but those horses they're going to where the front leg is pointing. It's not that huge high front leg that then drops and that's where the horse lands. So I think people need to stop looking at the still picture and realize that a horse is a video, alive, breathing, moving machine. And yeah, we all get too judgmental, just click, 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 looking at these little photos. That's
Thank
my
you.
opinion.
Yeah. Lisa, what do you want to see the rider do when the horse is severely misbehaving in the ring, or at what point is it out of control? What do you do in those situations?
If it's a severe disobedience, and this is in the USDF rule book of 20 seconds, then as a judge, we have to eliminate. I have in certain situations when a horse has reared completely on its two hind legs, come down and said, no, I'm not going, I have eliminated for the safety of the rider. We're really looking at the safety first. It's kind of an interesting question because I don't look at what I'd want the rider to do. I want the rider to stay safe when a horse is disobedient. I don't want to see the rider at all get abusive with the horse. They should stay calm with the horse. We are out for the welfare of the horse as judges. But they do have to be aware that if it's a 20-second disobedience, that we do have to eliminate.
Janet, anything to add?
In the FEI ring, we have a rule which isn't used often, but for the welfare of the horse, if we feel the horse is really being ridden above the level it belongs and the horse is really stressed and really having difficulties, we can eliminate the rider for that as well.
Okay. Do you judge junior riders differently from adult amateur riders?
If they have cute pigtails and big bows, yes, I love them.
And a pony.
So amateur riders get your little pigtails out.
And the bows, they're so, oh my God, adorable. No, again, we have one standard. We have a lady long time ago, Lendon, you probably remember because we've been on this dressage committee doing this for like 100 years at least. And we had a lady that every year would write a letter to the dressage committee and ask us to please judge on a different standard for adult amateurs. And it is, let me tell you, it is hard enough to train judges to follow one standard, much less try to say, okay, this is the standard for adult amateurs. And then we have the juniors with the cute little pigtails. And no, this is an international sport. We are in the Olympics because we have an international standard and we have to judge on that standard. We don't have any choice. And I think people who are upset with that standard and, well, my horse, it's not treated fairly, or I'm not treated fairly, we really can agree or disagree, but we have that standard that we have to uphold. So it makes this sport very hard for sure. So
we've talked a lot about the horses. Lisa, what do you look for in the rider when you judge an equitation class?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that.
A very small subject.
It's just so
thank
small.
you for asking that.
Just in the equitation class. Well, we want to see that the rider is from the side, because when I judge equitation, I run all over the ring, and I don't run, but I look from the side, I look from the back, I look from the front. I want to see a symmetry of the rider from the back over the horse to keep in balance. I want to see a straight line from the ear through the shoulder, through the hip, through the heel. We want to see back and hips that follow. I could go on and on, but there's forever. We also judge a certain amount of effectiveness of the rider in the equitation. Do they have the feel to stay with the horse? And do they have the ability to understand what connection means? from the front, we want to see that the legs are close to the horse, not that the heels are up and into the horse's side, especially if the rider has spurs on. We'd like to see correct alignment from the back. There's a straight line from the neck through the seat. We don't want to see bouncing out of the saddle. We want to see supple following hips. What else would you like to know, London? There's so many more things.
Well, let me throw it to Janet. What do you know, when you have to give the rider score at the end of the test, not an equitation class, but a regular technical test, what's briefly?
So for me, we have in the US, we have 2 rider scores. So the first rider score for me is a little bit like judging the Miss America contest. The first score is the bathing suit contest. You know, how did that rider look in the bathing suit? And then the second score is how did the rider do in the talent contest? So we have riders that look very good on the horse, but they're not effective. And on the other hand, we have riders who, I had an older rider with scoliosis. So she never got a very good score because she was always crooked, but that, you know, she had a physical deformity. She had no choice. But I told her, I said, you're going to get a low score here, but let's ride really well and be very accurate. And I think in the talent contest, we're going to get a high score. So those 2 scores balance each other. You have to look good and you have to ride well. So you have to do both things.
We had a question about foam. Do you take into account if the horse has a dry mouth or a little bit of wet coming out, or looks like he's been covered in marshmallow fluff, but he hasn't been covered in marshmallow fluff?
Yeah, can you believe marshmallow fluff? I mean, it's like,
I
okay,
didn't know about that.
what do we tell Walter here? Okay, Walter, put your finger, taste it, see if it's sweet. I mean, strange, but it's more the foam is sort of a byproduct. Some horses foam naturally more than others. And I think you can clearly see a horse in the muscles, if the jaw is rigid, you can see if the mouth is open, if the tongue is pulled up. So there's so many other visual indicators that I just don't get all excited if I just see foam, because oftentimes I see a lot of foam and then whoop, whoop, there's a tongue coming out. So it's one of the pieces of the puzzle. But again, we have to, as judges, look at the whole picture and not just focus on one piece.
And what about grinding teeth?
So for me, it's not a big deal if there's no other signs of tension.
Okay.
I'm on the same page. There can be concentrating grinding and then there can be tension grinding, but you'll see the tension grinding through the whole horse's body.
Lisa, some thoughts on judging intro. What are you looking for in an intro test?
Well, it's properly named or appropriately named because it is the introduction for the horse and the rider to our sport. And the purposes are to introduce the horse and the rider and to see if the contact is acceptable, if the horse is accepting the contact. Obviously, if they are truly on the bit and moving with suppleness, they will get higher scores. I think it is important because it introduces accuracy, and there is an accuracy and geometry score in intro. So that is something for the riders to learn at intro, especially if they're doing walk trot. It goes very slowly for the first 2 tests, so it gives them an opportunity to learn how to use corners, to properly do 20-meter circles, to properly do diagonal lines, and to learn how to do straightness on the center lines. It's a very good introduction to our sport.
Do you think, because this is sort of part of the question that as it was written in, do you think they can get a good score? I mean, not an 8 good score, but a nice score with the horse not being on the aids, on the bit? If they're just accepting contact?
If they're just accepting the contact, it could be, depending on the quality of the horse, in the 6.5 range. We do want to see them accepting the bit with a supple neck, back, and poll, but they can get a respectable score. I've given many respectable scores in the low 60s, mid 60s for horses that are just so obedient and do exactly what they're told with an accurate test.
Yeah. Okay, Janet, a question for you. It's a little bit long. Do you think, as one of our sports top judges, do you think you, as one of our sports top judges, have an inherent responsibility to police the sport and judge with some level of subjectivity when you know a rider has been sanctioned in the past for abuse during warm-up or blood in the mouth? If you don't think it is your responsibility to police, then what suggestions do you have to implement improvements to the pipeline in order to avoid having top riders rewarded for animal cruelty?
So our whole sport is subjective, but at the same time, when we sit down and judge, it can't be, oh my gosh, it's Isabel Worth, so her extended trot is going to be an 8.5 because it's Isabel. Or, oh my gosh, this person has been in trouble in the past, and so it doesn't matter what they do, I'm going to have a low score. We have to judge what we see and basically be blind to who's riding. That being said, when we see blood or when we see whip marks or spur marks, which we look very closely during the jog, the president of the ground jury with the vet's looking at the passport, and I walk around the horse and I'm looking for spur marks. Is there an open spur mark on either side of the horse? I'm looking for anything that I can see in the mouth, any sort of injuries around the feet or the legs. And then we make a note of that with the chief steward, and we ask then the chief steward to keep an eye on that horse in the warm-up, to try to avoid having a horse come into the arena in the public that already is bleeding. I mean, the PETA thing in Europe is huge. They stand around the arena and they would like us to turn all the horses out loose on the street. And it's very, I think we have to be very, very careful with our sport, that we're very correct in what we do for the welfare of the horse, but at the same time, we do that with integrity and we don't go out to get someone. So no, I don't sit there like a spider in my web waiting for somebody to make a mistake. If it happens, it happens. And we have a blood button on our computer. So if one judge sees it, the blood button comes up on everybody's computers, and we know. We don't have to wave to each other anymore. We used to if we saw somebody that we thought was irregular, we'd hang our hand out the booth. So now we have a lameness button too. So the technology has made things a lot easier and communication a lot quicker.
Thank you. Just a few quick, not overly relevant questions. At what show, we'll start since you're on the screen, Janet, at what show do you most enjoy judging?
Oh my, well, I have to say, of course, Aachen is an amazing show. And I was booed at Aachen, so I just feel like I've made it, And so when they cheer for you at Aachen because they love your score, they'll also, with no problem, be happy to boo you like hell. So it's like, yay, I'm being booed at Aachen. This is really great.
You've arrived.
But I have to say, one of my really most amazing shows is in Fritzen's, Austria. And the farm is owned by the Swarovski people with the crystals. And it's right at the base of the Alps. So you're sitting in your judge's booth surrounded by the Alps in Innsbruck, and they have a concert in their indoor arena, which has Swarovski crystal chandeliers, on Saturday night. When I was there last time, they had the Vienna Boys Choir singing, and a little orchestra. And we all sat there and had an hour of this beautiful music. And then we went to a sit down dinner with another live band. And then if that wasn't cool enough, they took all the judges to the Swarovski crystal. And I love shiny things. I'm like a magpie. I mean, you all know probably that I ballroom dance and you've seen all my like great dresses. Well, being turned loose in the Swarovski crystal store with a coupon for 70% off of everything you bought. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. So I have to say, really, that's one of my most fun shows because the view is fabulous and it's just the total package. It's really, really a fun show.
Okay, Lisa, I'm not sure you've had the Alps in Swarovski.
I can't beat that story for sure.
How about somewhere in the United? What's your favorite show in the US?
But well, in the US, I have two different shows for two different reasons. One, I love judging at Saugerties because for the US, the hotel, the Diamond Mills is just to die for. So for that reason. But I also love judging in Wellington because the quality of the horses, which and the international atmosphere, which we don't get often here in New Jersey. So for me to be able to judge it at Global or even White Fences, or even in California, but I'd say Global because of the truly international atmosphere and the quality of the horses that I get to see. So I can say to myself, I truly know what 9 and 10s are. So those are my favorites.
Lisa, since you're on the screen, can you share with us a funny moment in judging?
Well, there's some funny Scribe stories, but I don't want to tell them because some people might know who they are. But I'm gonna tell a funny story. I wasn't judging, but I saw this, and I think there's also a photo of it somewhere online. I was done judging. I was on a break. I was walking by a class where there was a young horse class going on. And for those of you who don't know, after the young horse classes, the judge speaks to the rider and tells them about what they saw, the gaits, the submission, general impression. And the rider has to stand there or they walk around on their horse. Well, this particular horse was, I think at the time, a 5-year-old stallion, maybe 4, and he was standing in front of the box and the rider was listening. All of a sudden he shook his head and the whole bridle just came off. And the horse just shook his head again and he looked down at the bridle and the rider was horrified. And I just laughed because I happen to know the horse and the rider. And it was just so true to this stallion's form to just go, oh, what was that? So that was one of the funnier things I've seen in a horse show.
And he stayed in the ring, I take it.
And he stayed in the ring like nothing happened. And the rider was horrified. The judge came, it was like, oh my God, do you need to get off? And she got off, she put the bridle on, and he was such a good boy for a young stallion.
How about you, Janet? You probably have a lot to choose from.
Yeah, 2 stand out, but I'll tell you, when I came back from Tokyo, the very first show I judged was a little level 2 show in the Pacific Northwest, just a 1-ring show, very low key. And my very first ride after the Olympics was an intro test. And the trainer, who is one of our riders down here in Florida, she comes and spends every season, was reading the test for her daughter. And the daughter was on a little teeny pony. And I'm like, oh, intro, how hard can this be? And I guess I was not paying attention because the little girl came in, she turned, you have forever to give comments. And with a pony, you have even longer. And then I noticed that she was not circling at the right letters that her mother was reading. And I looked and she had turned the wrong way at the beginning. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an Olympic judge and I can't even keep anybody on course and intro. So I ring the bell and I bring the little girl up and I'm like, I'm sorry, but you turned the wrong way. And she starts crying. And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's not your fault. It's my fault. I should have noticed. So the mother, she's crying and crying. So we both get her calmed down. She was the only one in the class. So it's okay, let's start over. So she's going along, everything's going well. And she asked the pony to canter. And you know how most ponies don't want to canter? This pony did not want to stop cantering. So we're lapping the ring around. And now she's screaming and crying and standing in this. Anyway, I just thought, this is just, from the highs to the lows, from the Olympics to this, it was a really funny experience. And then I had one horse, the fake tail fell off on the way to a canter pirouette in Prix St. George. And when it came back toward the C end to do the counter and the change, it saw the tail and totally lost it. Susan Sickle got the best pictures. So every time we went on that diagonal for the rest of the test, it was hysterical. I was laughing so hard. I know you should be serious, but those are my two most favorite stories.
So what horse, Janet first, what horse that you've judged would you most like to ride?
Sanseo.
Ah, interesting. Lisa?
Does it have to be one that we've judged?
One that you've judged.
One that we judged. I'd say probably about 3 years ago, and this is probably a horse that no one knows, but I was just like dying to get on this horse. At Global, it was a training level test, and it was ridden by a Canadian rider. And the horse comes in, and I would have been happy if it was Prix St. George. It was like 8, 8, 9. Oh darn, the Canada transition wasn't super, but it was a 7. I think it came out close to an 80%. And I just kept going, I want to sit on that youngster. I can't imagine how that must feel to be on a horse of that quality and that obedience. I just remember that for forever and ever.
Well, I think that with those lovely thoughts, I want to thank you both very, very much for giving us your time this weekend. This week, I don't know where I am or what I'm doing.
I know most of us don't.
It's Monday, right? Anyway, thank you so much. It's been such fun.
Thank you, everybody who
Thanks
came
for
and
having
listened.
us.
And
Thank you all.
think
Good
about
luck this show
judging.
season.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.